Okay, great. So thank you everyone for joining us for our September 2019 3 Tier 3 Webcast Series event. This month's topic is a threat vector update. As we get into the topic, you'll see we're going to really deal with the threat vectors in terms of business impact and strategy. This is not a deep dive technically into all the different variants of malware and threats that are coming out at us, but to look at this holistically, taking a step back from a business standpoint. Someone in the comments while registering pointed out that we sort of jumped the gun that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month here in the U.S. So we're glad we're able to get you on a head start. Before we get into the content, there's always a little bit of housekeeping. Your audio is muted today. That prevents any background noise or disruptions from accidentally interrupting the session. So at any point in the time, if you have a question or a concern or an idea you want to share, the questions window, there's an icon across the top or right-hand side of your screen. One of them opens the questions window. That's the best way. It alerts me that there's a question. It lets me know who asked it, and I can track to make sure we've got them all answered before we wrap up the session here today. Feel free to ask as we go through. I'll stop as appropriate. There is time at the end for Q&A as well. This session is being recorded. It generally takes us about 24 hours to get the video, audio processed, make sure it's clean, get it uploaded, integrated with the website. We'll send out an email to let you know it's there. Feel free to share it. Also want to remind folks that we have a great resource center on the website. Not just our third Tuesday at 3 webcasts that we did in May, July, and August, but really the whole history of the webcast series. We also have our shorter, more topic-specific Coffee and Clouds webcasts. And remember, if you register and view one of those, we get notified. You can ask. We'll send you either a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks gift card for taking the time on those. Sort of part of our little promotion effort there. We have a number of ebooks and white papers, and you can also request demos or trials or discussions around any of the solutions that we offer as a company. And so let's head into this, and we talk about the threat vector update and what are the threats to our businesses given the current age of what I will call the commercialization and industrialization of cybercrime. And really sort of the message is, winning's not an option. People talk about winning or losing the war against cybercrime. There really is no winning. The best you can do is not to lose. And I say that because however far we advance technologies and policies and procedures to protect ourselves, the criminals, the maldoers, if you will, tend to be always a half a step to 2 steps ahead of us. And they'll find the exploits. When you're looking for a way to break, it's easier to find a way to break in if you're looking for a way than if you just assume everything's protected. So really you have to approach this from being a never-ending problem. We'll talk about the different threat vectors and where we are with them today, and we'll talk about how to respond and sort of our strategy for response and some additional things you may want to consider as you look at the potential impact and risk to your business. So first, want to share some news, right? So June 1st of this year was a big milestone. GandCrab, a provider of ransomware as a service. So this is an organization that built ransomware, and basically you could license it and hire them out to do ransomware for you on your behalf or use their toolkits and do it yourself. But they ran a ransomware as a service business. They announced that they're shutting down, announcing that they had made $2 billion helping other people spread ransomware throughout the world, proving that if you want to do evil, there really are no repercussions. That was actually, it's interesting, on a couple of online forums, they posted this. It was almost a press release saying that they had attained their goal and they were shutting down. They had already notified all of their subscribers and users that the service would be going away. Now, with that, we don't expect the problem to be going away. In fact, year to date in 2019, the increase in ransomware attacks is still well over 100%. In fact, in Q1, it was 118% quarter over quarter. So it's still a rapidly growing industry. And the fact that we even have a ransomware as a service organization out there in the dark web tells me that it's really commercialized, right? That people see this as a low risk way to make money. And as long as that's the case, they'll continue to do it. We have seen some shifts, for example. There's more of a shift to small businesses and local government. In fact, back in earlier this fall in August, or late summer, if you will, on one day, 23 local governments in the state of Texas were hit in a coordinated ransomware attack. They were all hit by the same perpetrators with the same type of ransomware within a few minutes of each other during the day. Very scary, possibly testing of the scope of how broad could you go on attack as far as the ransomware goes and getting it back. And what we also know about most of these attacks is that 81% of them are made possible by leveraging stolen or weak passwords. That it's not the physical firewall that's going to be your primary point of protection. It really is about identity management, and identity and access management is the direction we're heading with. We also know that 64% of SMBs experienced one or more endpoint attacks that successfully compromised data in some form or another in 2019. Now, this could be as small as having a piece of malware with pop-ups and one file is damaged, where you have to run repair on your Windows laptop, something like that, all the way up to ransomware attacks that are encrypting entire file servers. It's a pretty high percentage for a large segment of the market. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's happening and why it's so prevalent and why we're seeing it continue. In fact, we now know that 58% of all cyber attacks in 2018 targeted small to mid-sized businesses. And there's a reason for this trend, right? Because a small business doesn't have the resources necessarily, if they're not protected properly or set up properly to do recovery in a cost-effective way. So average ransoms for small, mid-sized businesses have gone down. The attackers know that more companies have cyber insurance, so they'll keep the ransom within typical limits of what cyber insurance will pay, or they'll make it so that paying the ransom is just a bit more affordable and easy, or at least perceived to be more easy and more affordable than not paying the ransom and trying to recover your data and scramble to do that. And so we also know that when you have a major attack that destroys data and requires recovery, or you can't recover for some reason, that 60% of SMBs that have a major cyber attack will fail within 6 months. That the disruption to the business is so great. It's disruption of your resources, of your operations, of your cash flow, of your customer relationships. It can have a profound effect on your business. And so here in the U.S., that 60% number is a scary number. So what do we mean when we talk about threat vectors and sort of the direction where threats are coming from? And I'm sort of going to work right to left here. So traditionally, when we thought about cybersecurity, we thought about infrastructure, servers, virtual machines, databases, networks, my routers, my switches. I have firewalls to protect them. Everything, we keep things secure by putting it behind the firewall. And that's great when the infrastructure is physical and can be blocked off physically. But even the scope of infrastructure is different now. It's not just those items listed. It's security equipment. It's monitoring sensors for HVAC or production systems on your assembly line, or inventory monitoring RFID systems in your warehouse. A whole range, user identity and building access control and security systems for your building. All of that comes under infrastructure. And there's still threats to that. We know, particularly with the Internet of Things and devices and sensors, that those tend not to be secure and pose a risk. If you remember back, I think it was less than 2 years, the major breach at Target stores. It actually happened through sensors on the HVAC system and the monitoring system for the freezers and fridges in the grocery part of a Target store that happened to be on the same physical and logical network as the point of sale system. And so the hackers were able to get onto the network through sensors related to the air conditioning system and the cooling systems for food, and then from there connect to the back side, the unsecure side of the POS system, because people trust that if it's physically in the store, it's secure. So we still have that threat vector. Cloud apps present a new type of threat vector now that we're in the cloud, is that the cloud providers themselves become targets of attack, right? And we've seen this, right? Uber, LinkedIn, Dropbox is in multiple breaches. most cloud services, now Microsoft itself and Google itself have not had those breaches, but a lot of these SaaS apps that we're relying and running our business on, they've been breached themselves. And that adds a level of complexity we'll get into a little bit in a few moments. Obviously, there's a threat vector from user data. This is spam and virusware, ransomware that comes in, phishing attacks, that we're really looking at, user data, email messages and documents attached. And I sort of loop some of the endpoints into infrastructure. I see overlap there, but the endpoints are different now too. It's not just your desktop, it's your laptop, it's your tablet, your smartphone, any device that you might use. And of course, there's identity now, who we are, for both users and administrators that can give a hacker access to information or access to your network where they can do harm. So we talk about identity challenge. This is what we see, right, in some of the challenges we face in managing identities, right? First and foremost, businesses want increased productivity and IT modernization, and that leads to more IT. And so we're seeing an explosion of apps, devices within our networks, within our user community. But even as we collaborate with our supply chain or with our customers, our vendors, we're seeing an explosion of connections with people outside our organization, right? So the very tools that make it easier to collaborate and be productive and facilitate great relationships with customers or vendors are the same tools and capabilities that create risk, right? So we see, the result of that, where identity theft, specifically for the intent of hacking systems, is becoming more prevalent, right? Within that challenge, there's evolving data privacy and security regulations that we need to, with which we need to comply. The big ones recently, GDPR out of the European Union, California's new standards for data privacy and individual privacy and security. Massachusetts, for years, has had a personally identifiable information, or PII, set of regulations, as well as the ones we're used to, industry-specific, card industry regulations, HIPAA compliance, things of that nature. At the same time, we see there's an increase in identity attacks, and there's a lack of visibility and control about identity attacks because identity hacks are generally targeted at the individual. And oftentimes the individuals don't realize they're being hacked. And we'll talk about resolving that and responding to that as well. So we look at endpoint security. People say, well, gee, no one's doing good old-fashioned malware anymore or viruses, but that's not true. As I mentioned earlier, 64% of MSPs lost data in 2018 due to an endpoint attack at some scale. And when you look at the cost of recovering a PC and getting that end user back to productivity or returning RTO, return to operation, the average cost per compromised endpoint in 2018 was $763. It's more than that now. And we look at the scope of this, we now know that we do a fair percentage of our work on business critical applications on our mobile devices. And that may be email, it may be a specific business app or an admin tool that you use to monitor or run your business when you're out of the office. But small businesses are recognizing that is a vulnerable part of your environment, and you might not have it properly protected. And then a scary statistic from the same survey, which this came out of a firm, Pax8, that does research in this area, that 20% of SMBs, and this was talking to the business leaders, the CEOs, the CFOs, didn't have or were unaware if they had some form of endpoint security. So we still need it. The risk is still there. The impact for stopping malware on the physical devices that are in the hands of each individual users is still present. It still has to be part of the solution. Okay, user data, this is where it's really exploded. And it's exploded because the hackers have learned how to use human nature to their advantage. And so the whole concept of phishing or pretext, all of those techniques that use human factor engineering and modern psychology techniques are effective. Now we know that right now about 93% of breaches in small and mid-sized businesses initiate from an email message, right? It might be a phishing attack, it might be spear phishing, it might be identity impersonation, it might be an attachment to an email from someone you know and trust that was infected by malware on their machine as it was being sent, and the person who sent it to is even unaware that their emails are infected. With respect to ransomware, phishing emails are tops as far as delivery method. That's not surprising given how the personal information is used to get you actually to click the link and trigger the download. Interestingly enough, 48% of malicious email attachments are identified as Microsoft Office files, whether they are or not. And that's an issue because people, if I'm sending you a Word document or Excel spreadsheet, it looks like it's coming from me, I'm someone you trust, you're more apt to click on the attachment and open it, triggering the damage. And what's also interesting is 86% of global phishing attacks are targeting U.S. companies. And that, you look at, everyone bemoans the headache of GDPR. So you can argue about the policies and the procedures and the laws and the fines and everything. What GDPR did for the European Union was bring security of personal information to the forefront as a business issue, which caused people to act and put in the protections, right? So in the U.S., we don't have those strict regulations. It's varying by state and jurisdiction. Therefore, we don't have the same level of privacy and security mindset that the EU has right now. It makes us better targets, right? The best analogy here is, when we moved into, when my wife and I first bought our house, we're in an area of our community that's a little more rural than other parts. We thought, okay, if something happened here, probably wouldn't be spotted by a neighbor. So we put in an alarm system, right? Well, we know that a home burglar system isn't going to stop someone from coming in and grabbing something and getting out, particularly since we're on the edge of town and far away from where the police typically are to respond. What we do know, however, is that if we have the alarm system and it's visible and we've got the, protected by XYZ alarm company sign on the windows and the doors and in the flower bed out front, and our next door neighbor doesn't, that their house suddenly looks a lot more attractive than ours, right? So that's sort of what's going on here. The EU, by promoting GDPR and holding to it, created a culture that businesses adapted to and adopted better protections and make them less viable targets. So the focus is now shift on U.S. companies. So we really need to step up our game, I guess, is the story, and get on par with the rest of the world, if you will. Cloud apps is a vector, right? Why? Because on average, your employees have 8 SaaS apps. There's a good chance that many of those are shadow IT. They're not things that you're paying for, or you might be paying for off their expense report, or they might have put it on the company card, but they're not officially, quote unquote, IT sanctioned or vetted applications. When we look at companies with 50 or fewer employees, on average, they have 40 apps across the company. We know that shadow IT is a huge problem in the age of cloud, that if you're not offering it through your IT services something that someone needs, they will go on, they'll do the Google or the Bing search, they'll find a solution, they'll download the app, they'll test it out. If it doesn't work, they'll cancel before the free trial ends and they'll move on. But they're going to go out and get those apps if you don't do it, right? We also know from studies that have been done that, one of the issues you have is, I have we have our internal apps and we have third-party apps we use. So it's not uncommon for people to be using their work email identity for work-related accounts. LinkedIn, Uber for their Uber rides, Dropbox for business, or Dropbox a personal account if the company's not providing it. When we do that, we know that about 70% of workers use identical or similar passwords across those business apps, right? Which makes cloud apps themselves a good target of cybercrime. So we've had people who've had their email systems and their filing systems breached because, one of their senior people happened to be part of the LinkedIn breach and had a similar password to what LinkedIn has. So a hacker went out and bought the LinkedIn user identity off the dark web and said, you know what, I'm going to try this username password combination with 20 or 100 variants of that password, and lo and behold, they're able to get in. And so last was infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, premise-based IT is still a target. That's often where the ransomware and the malware hits, obviously, to encrypt files. you take control of someone's machine, you have access to everything that human as a user has access to within the environment, on-premise and cloud. We know that 47% of SMBs experienced web-based attacks in 2018. So when we look at infrastructure, we look at the fact that you're accessing the internet and accessing the web. So web filtering, web monitoring, DNS protection becomes critical. We know that 45% of business critical applications have some form of mobile access. So you can't just be looking at your desktops and your laptops. You've got to be looking at your mobile devices as well. And that when you get into more severe breaches, 39% of those damage more than half of a company's systems, right? So something happens, you get ransomware, you've got roughly a 4 in 10 chance that half your computers are going to be affected before you can stop the spread and start dealing with it. And so a business with 20 computers, that's 8 machines, that's a lot of work and a lot of impact and a lot of data lost or data that needs to be recovered. So how do we respond, right? We've used this acronym before, so this hopefully if you've attended out some of our other security briefings, it's not new to you, but we talk about CPR. And this isn't the chest thumping, get the heart started again, although if you're hit with ransomware, you might need it. This is about communicate, which is really communicate and educate, prevent and protect, and respond and recover. And we've modified it a little bit. We used to just say communicate, prevent and protect, and recover. But now we realize there's a response mechanism that has to be there, not only because of regulations in many states or at the federal level here in the States and in other countries worldwide, but you need a response from a business standpoint as well and how you deal with your customers. So what do we mean about communicate? This is where we deal with the human factor, right? We know that most threats to small and mid-sized businesses start with email, and most of those involve phishing. So a phishing email is going to have just enough information so that the person believes it's legitimate. It's going to look close enough to the real thing that it might be hard to notice that it's not a legitimate email. So it's important that humans understand the threat, the types of threat, the natures, the scope, the dangerous behaviors that sort of fit that cycle and use it. We need to teach them safe behaviors. We need to help them recognize trouble and report that, and make sure they understand when to ask for help. If you're not sure, don't click it, right? And to make sure they'll get the message, you really need to test them and get that feedback, right? Which means sending a fake phishing email to your company and seeing who clicks it, right? And what we generally find out is that, our customers with more than 10 or 15 employees, in that range, have always seem to have at least one person who will click on everything no matter what, right? So you want to identify the people who are more prone to click or may not be aware or may have missed something. It's an ongoing, it can't just be a one-time training. Hey, come to the conference room for half an hour with your coffee, we'll go over it. This is an ongoing activity that needs to happen on a regular basis over the course of the year, over the course of the lifetime of the employee, that's adapted as the threats and the nature of what's going on help. People need to feel personally responsible and to some sense accountable for making sure that they're behaving in a way and working in a way that minimizes the risk. Prevent and protect has a whole spectrum of services around different aspects in those threat vectors. So we'll walk through them. So there's certain things that we see need to be part of prevent and protect. Multi-factor authentication to protect identities, advanced threat protection for sophisticated phishing and spoofing in emails, no longer allowing auto-forwarding of emails because those are used by hackers to gain information that help them navigate your network. You can't just have endpoint security on your laptops and desktops anymore. You need next-gen endpoint security, ones that don't just look at signatures of files and look for tampering of files, but actually look at the behavior of the file of when it's saved to disk or when it's opened, and have the ability to stop it and even do minor rollback to prevent an attack from realizing if it senses that an attack is starting. And we need that mobile security as well because it's Android and iOS devices are now susceptible as much as your Mac OS or your Windows PC machine are susceptible. You also need to implement web and network security. We need to know that viruses and malware aren't riding down in the code of a video that someone's watching on a news site that's even a reputable one that's been corrupted through third-party content. You need the network security to know your DNS isn't being hijacked and people can't spoof you to others and they can't spoof you to yourself, right? And put in those protections. And that's, and this is the majority, but not all of the technical things we can do to help prevent and protect your environment. There are other components as well, such as file level encryption and encryption of making sure all data is encrypted at rest and in transit. There's data loss protection systems that will monitor outbound communications and say, hey, this is confidential. Digital rights management, automation and recognition. The current suite of Office 365 services has AI built in that you can turn it on and have it recognize information that's likely confidential or likely should be protected, and it will automatically put protections on, such as do not print or download or forward, etc. You set those rules. So there's a lot you can do. At a business level, you sort of have to take a step back and really say, okay, are we going to enforce data protection and compliance, right? And what we know from surveys is right now 31% of small mid-sized businesses do not comply with any security standards or guidelines, and only 20%, meaning 72% don't have an acceptable use policy, even any guidance to their users on what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, from a policy and procedure standpoint. And for those SMBs not complying with any security standards or guidelines, it means they're probably out of compliance with PCI and HIPAA in some of in any regulatory they have, but it's also they're not identifying what the best practice is and how that's going to be deployed and used in their company, educating their employees and holding them accountable to follow it. And the lack of prevention and protection, both on the technical side and the human side, is where you open up the opportunity for attacks to get past your defenses, right? So what happens when it's inevitable, right? No defensive position is perfect, and the threats change rapidly enough that it isn't, we can be close, but it's impossible to adapt to every threat within a time frame that you'll never be hit by that threat. The threats are moving too fast. There are too many of them, and as fast as we work to plug the holes, there's another angle, there's another opportunity that you can become a victim. Okay, and we have to start thinking about this not as inconvenience. This is victim of a crime, and that's really where we're at right now. This is criminal enterprise run amok. So let's talk about respond and recover. And I know in the past, when we've talked about this topic, we've talked a lot about the recovery, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. First, I want to talk about the business level response. What happens if you've been hacked or you think there's a data breach and information's been leaked? Well, you need forensics. You need to figure out what happened, what's the scope, how far has it spread, what's the risk. Have we stopped it? Have we disconnected have we closed the valve to stop the outflow of information or the external access in? The next thing you're going to want is legal advice, right? And not just, I have general corporate counsel. We have special counsel when it comes to cyber threats and breaches and those types of activities. Why? Because you're in a myriad of different issues. It's not just about the legalities of what's happened. It's about your contractual commitments to your customer, your regulatory compliance, state laws and federal laws about disclosure and notification, about doing whatever you can to mitigate legal action against your company, right? You want that. You're going to need legal advice in your response. You're probably going to want or need some help with public relations. And public relations isn't just press release, right? This is really corporate communications and public communications, and it involves your customers as well, right? So how are you going to message out that this has happened? How are you going to make the disclosures? How are you going to respond? What's the story you're going to tell? How are you going to position how you discovered it? How you're going to prevent it? What your next steps are going to be? That's all. It's the crisis management of public relations, and it's to all of your constituency. It's to your investors, your owners, your employees, your customers, your vendors, your business partners, and potentially to the public at large, and even potentially dealing with the media. We know of a company, we don't work with them directly. They're not a particularly large company. They had a breach. their local TV station got wind, and lo and behold, their investigative unit was standing between the back door of the business and the owner's car. Right? And he was totally caught off guard. He was never expecting that the local news would come talk to him about his about what happened and the risk and everything. So he was unprepared to have an answer for that and how he would deal with that. Right? And finally, there's customer interaction. And depending on the nature of the breach and who your customers are and the sort of the size of the breach, particularly if you're dealing with consumers, ramping up a call center where people can call and get information, get questions answered, and even being prepared to do things like credit monitoring for your customers if you're on the consumer side of a breach and where that happens as well. And so all of these need to be sort of built in and planned from the business level of responding to a breach and a loss of data. Okay, and it really comes down to what happened. Hey, if you get ransomware and your files are encrypted and you're able to encrypt them, and nothing was leaked or no information was stolen, that's great. Your response is going to be very different. Of course, you might need the forensics to know if the information was stolen as well. Okay, in fact, there's some suspicion now that some of the current ransom attacks, really it's about stealing information and then they trigger the ransomware to cover their tracks because you're so worried about decrypting your files that you don't look to see if someone's been stealing data for the last 4 months without you knowing it. Okay. Technical level response, obviously you've got a breach, you've got a failure, you've got ransomware on machines. You need to isolate it, you need to halt it, remediate it, you need to recover data. And really, it's not just about data recovery, it's about returning to operations. And why is that important? Because you may be able to do partial data recovery and get your business open again in a day or two, but fully recovering your data is going to require resources that's going to impact the productivity of your team. Right? We ran in a different webcast, we ran a scenario we developed looking at a number of cases where we had helped customers out and companies who weren't currently our customers. And we looked at a small ransomware infection, and even though they had their systems restored and recovered within 3 business days, the actual total impact on the business was 18 business days. So it was 18 person days times the number of people in the company was the total productivity cost and impact of downtime, of overtime to recover data, of slow response, or the fact that they couldn't respond to customers and had to spend more time gathering the data manually to return customer phone calls, a whole myriad of things. Small problem can have a huge impact, and you want to be able to return to operations. So the best way to be able to return to operations is not just think about data backup and recovery, right? We know how data gets damaged by ransomware, but actually, interestingly enough, most of the time it's by accidental malicious action by end users, right? We know already, we've talked about that Microsoft and Google and all of the cloud companies work on a shared responsibility model where they will protect the service, but it's your responsibility to protect your data in the service. And remembering that even though we're on the cloud, local devices still pose the risk for data loss. That gets our data back, but let's talk about business continuity and disaster recovery, right? We want to be able to quickly restore systems to a state prior to the loss, right? So if you have ransomware hit at 2 in the afternoon, wouldn't it be great if you could restore your business to the state it was at 1:45 or at 1:50 or at 1:55 so that you've lost 5 minutes of work that you have to recreate? Then you don't even care that your files were encrypted because you simply wipe them and go back 5 minutes and start over, right? To do that, you generally need to be able to operate on temporary systems until cleanup is complete. This is not an on-premise solution. We don't recommend that small businesses spend the money on that expertise and that infrastructure to do that. You may, because business continuity and disaster recovery isn't just about ransomware and cyber attacks. It's cyber attacks. It's about broken pipes and chemical explosion at the factory down the road, and your power loss due to storms, flooding, hurricanes, roof collapses, whatever it is. You might need, and we recommend, and good business continuity and DR practice says, hey, if you need to be able to operate from alternate locations and where your business currently resides, you should be able to do that. And when you talk about that return to operation number, We want it in hours, not days. Ideally, you want to be able to return to operation within hours, running in a temporary environment where so you have the time and the space and the resources to fix the infrastructure and undo the damage or replace systems that have been damaged beyond salvation. And then once you're back and your infrastructure and your systems are in place, switch off that temporary operations back to your core operations with little or no disruption. That's sort of the ideal image, right? And so knowing where we are with threat vectors now and sort of the trends we're seeing, the different angles you have to protect, where we see putting services to block those, right? A lot more around identity and access management, things of that nature. Where can we help? What role do we have to play as your partner in all of this? First and foremost, we have the ability to help you draft policies and procedures, whether it's to be in compliance with outside regulations or even just adapt best practices to the size and scope and risk of your business. We can help you with that user training and education component, ongoing support, and even the testing and feedback to make sure your users understand their role in cybersecurity and attack prevention and response, and that they're aware and they stay current on what they have. From a protection and prevention standpoint, don't have time to go through everything we can do here. We have the best practice technologies and the operations to help you run them to suit your business. So we can do things like replace your dedicated admin accounts or your non-exclusive admin account with dedicated admin accounts that have conditional access for specific issues. So you log it as required by GDPR. We can help with putting in identity and access management tools so that you're better beyond just two-factor or multi-factor authentication. We're able to control who has access to what systems. We can put in the technology and the procedures to make sure that employees are onboarding and offboarding and standardizing, that they get the application access to the cloud and on-premise applications they need specifically for their jobs, and they don't get access to anything else. And then we can put in the device management and the ecosystem management so they can't get anything else by themselves. It has to go through. And then we've got the ability to help you with your response and your recovery. We now, for a long time, we've had some great business continuity, disaster recovery, disaster recovery and data recovery solutions. We still have those. We have expanded offerings there now as well. More importantly, now we've launched services that provide breach response and cyber insurance, almost as a package. Actually, it's as a package where you get the breach response services. We talked about the forensics, the legal analysis, the public relations, the call center, the credit monitoring, all of that. There's a monthly fee. If you trigger it, it's all been prepaid. You don't have to worry about additional costs, and that's bundled with a cyber insurance policy. In fact, I'll start there. That's one of our new services that we've started rolling out that's available to you now. We have a $724 prepaid breach response services package that gives you everything we talked about, and it comes bundled with a cyber insurance coverage of $250,000. Now, I realize that you may have or want to get cyber insurance through your regular insurance broker and underwriters. That's great. Those cyber insurance policies are underwritten, meaning you have to document your level of risk before they give you a price. And that effort in itself can be costly. We do as a service the security technology and the security procedure responses to cyber insurance audits is one component of it. That can be for our contribution to the overall effort for small business can be 20 to 45 hours of consulting time, depending on what they have in place or what they don't have in place. So going through the time and money involved in going through an underwriting process for cyber insurance can cost small businesses thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. Yes, that gets you more coverage. It gets you possibly a lower premium, but it's a balance, right? For most of our customers, a broad basic policy with $250,000 meets the immediate need that every business should have covered. And if and when a business is ready to move on to a more robust underwritten policy, or deep, I shouldn't say more robust, a broad, still broad but deeper policy, with more options on it. That's based on where the rates are based on underwriting of your risk and ongoing audits. You stop our service and go with them. But that service isn't just about the insurance. It's about giving you the immediate access to the response team you need to deal with a cyber attack, especially if it may have a breach. We have, our roots are in business level consulting on IT. We've brought that forward again. We now will do what we call security business integration, where we help you develop your policies and procedures. We bring in best practice templates from industries, from experts, from our own experiences. We adapt those and customize those to meet the needs of your specific business, help you deploy them, educate your employees, get them to sign the acknowledgments, move forward, and then help with the monitoring and enforcement as well if you wish. And finally, we have SaaS management tools and services now. We can standardize that onboarding and offboarding. We can monitor, manage who's kept what licensing and what the spending is, even identifying most shadow IT scenarios, and advanced SaaS management tools that ensure permissions across data across multiple systems is consistent, and that the operation within each of your SaaS cloud systems is appropriate as well. So there are a number of ways that we can help you on with some of our new offerings. They're more in the prevent, protect, and respond and recover capability, but valuable and useful to you nonetheless. If it's something you're interested in, let us know. So what is your action plan? One, as we say right now, assess, look at your business objectives, your desired outcomes for your business, and then look at your current need and readiness with respect to cyber threats. Are you educated? Is your team educated? Do you have the right technologies, policies, and procedures in place to protect and prevent? And if, forbid something should happen, will you be able to respond? What will your response be? And will you be able to recover in a way that allows your business to continue to survive, if not thrive? Once we do that assessment, it's time to define the value proposition. If you do nothing different than you're doing now, what's the cost? What's the downside risk? And then let's look at the plan. How much does that cost? What does it need to be strategically? And what are the tactical phases to get you from point A to point B? So I've covered the content. I know I've covered a lot, talked about where the threats are coming, the types of solutions with respect to communication, protect and prevention, response and recovery. If you have any questions, now is the time to ask. We'll wrap things up and ask. If you'd like to know more, our general info is on the screen. My personal email and phone number direct to my desk is there as well. I will tell you that I'm much better at answering emails than I am at picking up the phone if I'm busy or in getting back to that voicemail message that you leave. So for contacting me directly, email is best. If you want to know more, if you even want to just to have a conversation to better understand where you stand with respect to security, let us know. We can have that conversation. If you're ready or you feel the need for a more formal assessment with a documented assessment, we offer those as engagements as well, or as part of overall service packages. I did get one question: how long does the initial assessment typically take? Duration-wise, those initial assessments typically run over a duration of 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes we use tools. There might be some interviews and discussions we have, and some of the analysis of the results to sort of get a picture of where you're at and where you're going. So it's not necessarily a lengthy or expensive process to do a formal security assessment for your organization. The actual scope of the assessment will be based on a discussion of what we feel your needs are, the size of your business, and the complexity of your business. It actually is more relevant than the size, and as well as the complexity of your IT environment. In doing those assessments, we can work with any software you may have. As an organization, we're a long-standing Google Cloud partner. We're also a Microsoft partner at their Silver tier for cloud services to small and mid-sized businesses. And we work with a wide range of other cloud products, and we have our own tool set that we can deploy to actually do the analysis. We'll look at your current security infrastructure, the security tools you're working with. Sometimes we'll say you're fine. Sometimes we might recommend switching or adding additional capabilities into the mix. And so I think I've answered a couple of questions that have come in. As I was answering, I just kept the conversation going. So I know I'm about 45 minutes into the hour, so I know some of you have to get back to your day. So I will, if there are any other questions, please enter them now. And let me know. I'll continue to stay on the line to answer them. But I do want to thank everyone for joining us here this afternoon. Always appreciate you taking your time out of busy days, busy weeks, our busy lives to learn. Hopefully you found this informative and useful, and at least 1, 2, or maybe even 3 nuggets that you can take back and say, we need to do this, or we should think about this, or this is what we should do in our business, some actionable item for you. Let us know. We'll get the link to the recording out to you. Feel free to come back to refer to it or share it with friends or acquaintances if you think it'd be valuable to them. So thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Have a good day, and I will stay on the line. I'm going to stop the recording of the session now, but I will stay on the live line for a few minutes to answer any questions in the questions window. Thank you very much, and have a great day.